So Cassie is a record-keeping professional who, over her career, has worked mainly in digital record-keeping and digital preservation, as well as on a variety of open data and journalism projects. She wrote the chapter on digital record-keeping in the Australian Society of Archivists textbook, Keeping Archives, and has won a number of industry awards for her writing and for standards development. She's served in committees and leadership roles with the Australian Society of Archivists and the International Council on Archives, and was the project lead for the review of the International Standard on Records Management, ISO 15489. Cassie was a co-founder of the Record Keeping and Archives Discussion Group, the Record Keeping Roundtable. So I'd like you to join me in welcoming Cassie.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about archival activism. And I think it should not only lead in to what Tim's going to talk about, but also it's going to touch on one of the key themes of this conference, which is around making links and around collaboration. So let's get cracking. I'm introducing my talk with this image because this quote has informed quite a lot of my thinking in this area of activism and the archival profession, and I've accompanied it with this picture of Derrida with his cat, because there's a cat. Apparently, when this cat looked at Derrida, he was inspired to contemplate the abyssal limit of the human, and on which he gave a 10-hour presentation at a conference in 1997. That's some moggy. So I think you'll see as I speak how this work of Derrida's has informed some of the ideas I'll be talking about. Living in the United States and with the current election that's on foot there is a lot of talk about temperament. So I'm actually going to start off by talking a little bit about our temperament, about the archivist record keeper temperament. Archivists and other professional record keepers are an interesting bunch. Widely seen as quiet people who are respectful of authority and rules, the stereotypes usually have us labouring away in basements, always dusty, and possibly wearing a cardigan. This is one of my favourite blogs. It's called Dusty Archive Kitten Deaths, and essentially you can't read the small text, but it says every time someone says dusty or musty archive, the ghost of Schellenberg kills a kitten. And really, I'm just putting that up because I like it, it's funny. So we're not typically bold or attention-seeking, and we are unlikely activists. However, both the archivist record keeper type and the work itself are, as we know, a lot more interesting than these stereotypes. We have a unique view of the world of 21st century information, and that's the most important currency of today. And our work is inherently political. In many of the jobs we do, we have agency or at least influence in matters of policy, record-keeping systems design, the retention and findability of records and records access. These are not trivial matters in politico-social terms. Records, in all their forms, enable and leave traces of what governments, corporations and individuals do. They can be created in order to repress or to free, to nurture or to attack. They can be shared in order to heal or withheld in order to deceive. Records and record keeping support and affect myriad aspects of the lives of individuals and can influence the direction of a whole society. And we know that they are not made and managed in a vacuum. Today, for most of us, the myth of archival impartiality has been thoroughly dismantled. Archivist record keepers know that every record-keeping act, records creation, destruction, access, occurs in and is influenced by its layers of context, from the systems and people that are directly associated with the Record Keeping Act, to the motivations of the organisation that funded it, to the expectations and norms of the wider society in which it occurs. Part of the job of the archivist record keeper is to manage these contexts and to implement record keeping which is both useful and appropriate to its time and place. But this is not always straightforward. If our personal values and those of our employers, our funders or stakeholders do not align. As Chris Hurley has observed, we cannot comfortably design a better system for documenting the number of heads being processed through the gas chambers, as if good record keeping in a technical sense can be divorced from the uses to which it is put. Thanks not only to archival thinkers such as Hurley, but to a new generation of whistleblowers, publishers and information activists, we as archivist record keepers can see with greater clarity than ever before how record keeping can be used to achieve political aims, and that we have a unique role to play in either supporting those aims or opposing them. And so have non-archivists, leading to the emergence of a plethora of independent online record-keeping and archival projects. So today we have an extremely interesting professional landscape featuring both the traditional record keepers in government agencies, archives and libraries, as well as independent archival enterprises and projects, in some cases hybrids of these. University College London's Andrew Flynn explores developments in this independent, non-professionalised archival activity, including what he terms projects and endeavours which are actively engaged in radical or counter-hegemonic public history-making activities. Flynn cites examples that are largely concerned with creating archives that address gaps in official and traditional archives, including projects like Ruckus, the Black LGBT experience in the UK, or East Side Community, which documents the daily lives of East London working classes. In the United States, Witness.org's Yvonne Ng has described a number of community-centred archive initiatives that have emerged from the Black Lives Matter movement, including the Preserve the Baltimore Uprising 2015 archive project and Documenting Ferguson. As Ng explains, the projects share a collaborative approach between traditional archives and archivists, community organisers and concerned individuals. The Documenting the Now project has developed a tool and a community around supporting the ethical collection, use and preservation of social media content, with a particular focus on protest movements. So with all of these projects, we're seeing work that is coming from a progressive standpoint, interested in themes of equality and anti-discrimination, of claiming a place in history for those who have been hidden or voiceless. But of Flynn's radical or counter-hegemonic public history-making activities that we've seen over the last decade or so, the most potent, perhaps, have come from a convergence of archives and fearless journalism. In some ways more familiar to the archivist record keeper, these projects place the evidence of the record at the centre of their enterprise, as opposed to having a more generalised mission to document the experience of a group or a movement. Of course, WikiLeaks, of course, organisations like the National Security Archive, Muckrock News and more. It's my view that records published by these journalistic archives, having been secret but which are then manifested in new contexts, generally carry the potential to catalyse more radical change over shorter periods of time than some of the community archive projects that I described. But certainly all of the projects are products of both web-based culture and arguably a response to the early 21st century phenomenon of post-truth politics. So the archival urge, it would seem, has never been stronger. The fact remains, however, that these projects are not usually staffed by many of us unless it's in a part-time or pro bono capacity. In order to make a reasonable living, the vast majority of qualified archivist record keepers still find themselves employed by institutions of power, by governments and large corporations. In such settings, acting outside of the rules, for example by failing to comply with a corporate executive's order to destroy a damning piece of evidence, or by facilitating public access to records which are officially closed, presents risks to reputation, livelihood, or even personal freedom. And the temperament of many of us means that we very rarely see or hear of such actions. And indeed, if they do occur, there is very little protection or support from strong codes of ethics or legal or financial assistance from our professional associations, so that the few cases that do arise can instead serve as disincentives for others to act in similar ways. Bearing this in mind, it has been argued that operating outside of institutions of power, like government departments, public archives and corporations, is the only realistic way for archivists to be serious activists. In a post on Medium recently, American archivist and activist Jarrett Drake said, "Archivists who give a damn about freedom, like really give a damn and not just freedom for your personal self, should consider remaining free of an archive so that you can, 1, own your own labour, 2, use your labour to make archives about freedom, and 3, distribute freedom-driven archives to the public to access free of charge." In a recent presentation at the International Congress on Archives, Anne Gilliland called for digital archives action to address issues of global access and equity, including digital safekeeping places and certification practices for those who cannot maintain their own records. But who can we call on to build these likely virtual places? Who will bring our professional knowledge to these projects? With a very few exceptions, the projects and initiatives that I've described in this talk operate on the slimmest of operating budgets, if any at all. So how then to deliver Drake's freedom-driven and free archives? In our government and other institutional roles, we hone our skills in understanding and documenting context, in improving records usability, preserving the born digital record and more. Some of us spend our spare time contributing to community-driven archives projects or collaborating with journalists. We work on some projects which are ostensibly community-driven or on independent archives, but which are in reality hosted by universities or government bodies, which is the case in Documenting Ferguson, the Occupy Archive. It's now hosted and funded by a major university. So despite their many fine qualities, it seems to me that many of these projects that are serious about their political intent are not ideally configured for sustainability and ongoing independence. And in many ways, our predicament mirrors that of journalists who want to do serious investigative work. Without a benefactor, a generous fan base, clever online business model, or a combination of these, we won't be able to be truly independent and survive. So I can't offer a magic bullet for these problems here, but I think some, at least, of the answers to how the archivist record keeper can be both a professional and act politically in the 21st century lie in a couple of things. A recalibration of our professional identity and embracing decentralised models and technologies. Like many professions, we need to come to grips with a necessary refashioning of our professional identity. We have long known that there is no single application of the core knowledge and skills of the professional archivist record keeper, but rather that we use them in many different contexts and with many different partners. We know that in areas such as online presentation and findability, digital preservation and more, our work converges with that of librarians, curators, web designers, systems integrators, journalists, publishers and more. And I think we need to be prepared for further disassembling of the role of the archivist record keeper so that the most unique value propositions that we offer can be combined with other more easily monetised roles. I think we need to shake off some of the perceptions of our role, of the impartial archivist safe in her fortress and her cardigan, and look to new ways of combining our stuff with other skill sets. For example, the coder record keeper, making truly alternative systems of memory available to the marginalised, to the vulnerable. Or the journalist archivist, releasing records with the power to shift the course of global affairs and making sure they remain available and usable forever. And educational institutions and professional associations will need to keep pace with this shift. But to go to the decentralised technology, I think we need to embrace these kinds of technologies to create models for archival work that remove or at least reduce some of the more costly overheads for sustainable independent archives, allowing us to build communities with a direct interest in the record keeping we're doing who are willing to fund it. This means the use of decentralised internet-based technologies like blockchain that offer models for direct interaction with consumers of our product without needing extensive infrastructure. So we share permanent and uncorruptible evidence with that community and gather reward for our work as we do so. And I think we have to consider sustainability and be very clear-eyed about the need for reward for work done if we're to retain both professionalism and create sustainable quality record keeping. And blockchain-based systems, for example, offer us low-cost and highly targeted ways to enable that. So these kinds of systems could be deployed, for example, for dispersed communities such as refugees needing their identity and other records to be kept in secure and uncensorable repositories with useful metadata, making micropayments for their upkeep. Of course, some free access can also be part of these kinds of models, but we need to think about this much in the way that online businesses offer staged subscriptions, view-only or view and contribute models. Our metadata structures are ready to support this kind of technology, and I think the demand is there, given the right economic and functional model. It's micropayments and extremely low infrastructure. It's not forcing EDRMS-style, government-style record-keeping systems onto these communities, but building something new and intrinsically of the web. So these are a couple of suggestions for innovation and collaboration. There are, of course, countless other possibilities. But I think we are more cognizant of the political impact of our work than ever before, and I think now is the time for us to actively acknowledge it and create new frameworks from within which to act. I hope that by pursuing these kinds of professional futures, the activist archivist will have a real and very powerful role into the future. Thank you.